Thank you for inviting me, and good afternoon to all of you. Now, 25 years after the independence of the 5 Central Asian states, after they re-emerged from the isolation of history into the limelight of international relations, it is also an appropriate moment to look at India's relations with Central Asia as a part of rejuvenation. The political interests of the Russian and British empires had coincided by 1893 when they demarcated both sides of what is called the Wakhan Corridor. The Wakhan Corridor separated the Russian and British empires. On the north of the Wakhan Corridor was the Russian Empire, but the state there was called the Emirate of Bukhara, and that extended into what is today Tajikistan. And to the south was the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, including parts which are in the news these days called Gilgit-Baltistan. In fact, that is the first part of the territory of India, which is just below the Wakhan Corridor. By creating the Wakhan Corridor, the two powers effectively stifled the centuries-old interaction between our two regions, which had traversed what is loosely called the Silk Road. The new political leadership in Central Asia made a similar outreach to India 25 years ago. Some of you remember that each of the 5 newly independent Central Asian states, the leaders of each of them, had found time and interest to visit India during 1991, when Islam Karimov of Uzbekistan came here in August 1991. And the last one to make the journey was the then Prime Minister Abdullah Janov of Tajikistan in 1993. Despite our domestic preoccupations at that time, and most of you remember the financial crisis that India faced, the transfer of gold to London and so on, Narasimha Rao, who was Prime Minister, reciprocated this gesture from the Central Asian leadership by reaching out to Central Asia, and he visited the 2 biggest states, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, in 1993, in May that year. Now to come to the present. One of the biggest developments over these past 25 years in Central Asia has been the transition within its societies from a statist ideology of Bolshevism to a reaffirmation of the earlier spiritual and intellectual traditions of those countries. This has happened across Eurasia, but I really want to emphasize the importance it has for Central Asia, because Central Asia is, as we will see, the repository of a very, very rich and ancient spiritual and intellectual heritage. In some of the societies in this neighborhood of ours, which are currently under an ideological straitjacket, there will be a similar transition towards a non-ideological framework. And in that context, India and Central Asia are well positioned to contribute meaningfully to this process, which will result in a restoration of what we would like to call the spiritual harmony of Asia. Now, I have chosen 5 areas to focus on today. The significant link between India and Central Asia of Buddhism. Now, these are rock carvings, one from Ladakh in India on the left, and one from southern Kazakhstan at a place called Tamgali Tas. These are rock carvings on the right bank of the Ili River in Kazakhstan, which were etched by travelers, probably Buddhist pilgrims, who highlighted not only the teachings of Buddhism. For example, in the rock carving on the right, there is inscribed the chant of Om Name Padme Hum, but also the figure of the Buddha. Now, these rock carvings are similar, as I said, to those found elsewhere on the Silk Road, including in the Ladakh region of Jammu and Kashmir, and they date back almost a century ago, to the 1st century. It is important to recall this evidence today when many specialists in international relations are studying the grand attempts being made to revive the Silk Road, the ancient Silk Road in Asia. The archaeological evidence, the lifestyles of the people, the travelogues and histories, including by the famous Chinese traveler Xuanzang in the 7th century, all demonstrate that the Silk Road was not confined only to the movement of and investment in goods and services. Instead, one of the Silk Road's more important roles was in facilitating the flow of ideas and cultures. From Central Asia, Buddhism traveled east along the Silk Road to China and became established in a place called Dunhuang in central China. taking not only the teachings of Buddhism from India, but also Indian art forms such as cave painting. This is a detail from a painting in cave number 158 in Dunhuang, which is dedicated to the time when Lord Buddha attained parinirvana. The reason I put it here is that if you look at the clothes, especially the headgear worn by the representatives who are gathered on the mural, they are all from Central Asia. You can make out the Central Asian caps. You can make out the Kyrgyz cap, the Uzbek tubeteca, and so on. So this is something that existed on the wall, unfortunately, until the Cultural Revolution when it was vandalized. But there are photographs of before 1964 of the cave, and this is, I think, something that is worth looking at. Now, this tradition today, and this is important, this tradition today is being restored, is being revitalized through a huge international project called the International Dunhuang Project. In the general analysis of Central Asia as part of the Islamic world, not much is known both within and outside the region about their rich heritage, which effortlessly combined adherence to religion with a modern scientific temper. Among the many scholars who link India and Central Asia through their work, the writings of two, Al-Biruni and Ibn Sina, illustrate this link appropriately in the areas of astronomy and geodesy and medicine. Abu Raikhan al-Biruni was born in Khiva, which is today in Uzbekistan, in 973 AD, and influenced by the ideas and languages that traveled along the Silk Road. For example, he knew Sanskrit. He traveled to India in 1017 AD, and wrote about his observations in a book called Tariq al-Hind, which included a section on Indian astronomy. His contributions to geodesy, dealing with the measurement of the Earth and gravity, have an impact on our modern understanding of space research. His contemporary, Avicenna or Ibn Sina, was born in Bukhara in 980 AD, just 7 years later, and made seminal contributions to science, medicine, and philosophy. He learned Indian mathematics from the travelers on the Silk Road, and his writings on philosophy influenced Thomas Aquinas in Europe. His book, Canon of Medicine, played an important role in the evolution of Unani medicine in India. A third facet of the rich Islamic heritage of Central Asia, which resonates in India, is Sufism. Now, in November 1992, a visiting Indian delegation made a request to me to ask for permission to visit the shrine of Sheikh Naqshband, which is not far from the main city of Bukhara. It was an unusual request because during the previous 70 years of Soviet rule, such shrines had been kept away from the public gaze. The visit refocused on the origins of the Sufi Naqshbandi order, which is active not only in the Indian subcontinent, but also all the way across West Asia up to Turkey. The Silk Road, as I said, was important for ideas and cultures being brought closer to each other. One of the aspects of India's relations with Central Asia, which has developed over the past 25 years, and which plays a crucial role in the future evolution of our relationship, is the following. It is the creation of what we call knowledge-based societies. Now, on the 1st of January 1992, I received a friend of mine from Kyrgyzstan, Askar Aitmatov. His father at that time was one of the most well-known novelists of the then Soviet Union, called Chingiz Aitmatov. And Askar knew about the rich intellectual traditions of not only Kyrgyzstan, but the entire region, and he also knew about India. He came with a request. He said that he knew that India was going through a financial crisis and that we had no resources for the kind of assistance that Central Asians were receiving from countries which were richer, like United States, Turkey. China was not there at that time because they hadn't solved their boundary disputes. And he said that, but there's something that you have in India which is richer than all the riches that they offer us, and that is your experience in building knowledge, in creating knowledge. And he wanted to know if we could share our experience in developing human resources through our educational and technical institutions for people from Central Asia. This was really the beginning of the introduction of what we call the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program, known as ITEC, to Central Asia. Today, it has enabled thousands of Central Asians to be trained in diverse fields such as banking, small and medium enterprise development, diplomacy, information technology, and engineering. The ITEC program has also funded small and medium economic projects in Central Asia. The effectiveness of this cooperation is due not only to the excellence of the institutions in India where these experts have come and been trained, but also to the receptivity on the part of the Central Asian populations. And I think that's the important point which I would like to emphasize today. The receptivity of the Central Asian experts and their populations which have availed of the ITEC actually becomes very important when you consider one statistic, and that is that today, Central Asia, the 5 countries of Central Asia, have a combined population of 70 million people. That's more than the population of France or the United Kingdom. 33% of this population is below the age of 35. So it's a very growing, dynamic, young population who are well placed to use the kind of knowledge that they have acquired from the ITEC program for the development of their own countries and societies. The reason why knowledge has played such an important role in Central Asian societies is, and you have to trace it back to the Silk Road. The Silk Road was used by migration of peoples. I mean, if you go back in the archaeological histories, you will see the movement of entire tribes. For example, the Saka tribes, who moved out of what is today southern Kazakhstan into Afghanistan and came into the foothills of northern India. Their compatriots included people who created the Kushan Empire, which is perhaps the first time 2,000 years ago that you saw a space which extended from Central Asia all the way to Central India and laid the foundations for the Silk Road itself. The research that is going on the Kushan period provides us with extensive material to appreciate the role of knowledge in building resilient societies. In the more settled populations along the Silk Road, where people were not migrating all the time, such as Bukhara, Khiva, Samarkand, which are all on this map, there were scholars who sought knowledge in diverse fields. Their contributions are often called the Islamic Golden Age. And these contributions are marked by their advancement of knowledge in different fields such as science, medicine, astronomy, and the natural sciences. I believe that if we operationalize these agreements that were reached in 2010, we will see the emergence of a skilled and resourceful human resource pool in Central Asia that will enable the countries of the region to engage on equal terms with their foreign partners and innovate solutions for their own national and regional requirements, much in the way that India itself has innovated solutions for its own national and regional requirements. In the 21st century, India and Central Asia have a mutual interest in maximizing their relationship through connectivity. While air connectivity between India and Central Asia has improved, its core value is in increasing people-to-people contacts. The limitation of air connectivity is its high cost and low volume of transporting goods and even services. And therefore, people have looked at the other forms in which to establish connectivity. These are the traditional Silk Road connectivity of the land route, the maritime supplement to land connectivity, and what I want to focus on today, digital connectivity. Now, each of these 3 areas is important. Land connectivity is currently the least viable option for significantly increasing the flow of people and goods and knowledge, because in addition to the impact of the political separation of Central Asia from India a century ago, the volatility of the space lying between Tajikistan and India today prevents a realistic investment in restoring and upgrading the ancient caravan routes that brought our 2 regions together. Apart from this, the physical and technological barriers to land connectivity especially the requirement to traverse some of the highest mountain ranges of the world, which remain inaccessible during the winter months, poses a challenge for any significant increase in the volume of overland interaction. I mention this because very often we are told about the Karakoram Highway and the Karakoram Pass, but those of us who have had people to physically go and see how the Karakoram Highway actually operates report that during the winter months, traffic along the Karakoram Highway is almost non-existent. So it does exist on paper, but during the harsh winter months in Central Asia, this highway, this land route becomes limited. So despite that, we have one example of land connectivity being attempted right now as we speak, and that is in the energy sector. The most well-known project here is that of the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India gas pipeline project. Earlier this year, almost a year ago actually, or a little more than a year ago, the prospects of using maritime supplement to land connectivity improved dramatically following the nuclear deal between Iran and the major world powers in July 2015, because it gave confidence to investors and entrepreneurs that they could restart and plan the activities of connecting India and Central Asia without the fear of violating United Nations sanctions, which were then in place on Iran. Secondly, soon after, a historic agreement was entered into between India and Iran on the 23rd of May 2016, that's last year, to jointly develop the Chabahar port in Iran and connect it with road and rail networks up to Afghanistan and Turkmenistan, which would dramatically increase the potential for augmenting India's relations with Central Asia. Referring to the Chabad Agreement, it was said by the Prime Minister at that time in May 2016, and I quote him, "The economic fruits of the Chabad Agreement will expand trade, attract investment, build infrastructure, develop industry, and create jobs for our youth. The agreement will strengthen our ability to stand in mutual support against those whose only motto is to maim and kill the innocents. Its success will be a positive vote for peace and stability in the region," unquote. So the political and security dimension of this project is as important as its economic dimension. And that is a point I'd like to make when introducing the third project, which has again become viable after Iran's reintegration into international affairs, and that is the North-South Transport Corridor project. Now, at a time when the existing Red Sea route, which you see in blue from Mumbai up to Europe, is being threatened by volatility due to the conflict in Yemen, which is at the tip of the Red Sea and the Arabian Peninsula. The prospects of the North-South Transport Corridor, which was initiated by Russia, India, and Iran in September 2000 during former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee's visit to St. Petersburg in Russia, proposes to connect the European Union port of Helsinki, which is on top beyond St. Petersburg, through the Russian Federation, the Volga River basin, to the Caspian Sea, where you notice the town of Astrakhan marked in red, down to the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas, and onwards to Mumbai, and then onwards now to Singapore, which is the ASEAN connection. So it's a North-South Transport Corridor project which connects the European Union with ASEAN, and not only the original three countries of Russia, Iran, and India. Subsequent to the revival of this project, in March 2016, India agreed to join a trade transit agreement called the Ashgabat Agreement. The Ashgabat Agreement would enable India to use the existing trade and transit corridors linking Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan, and integrate these linkages in Central Asia with the North-South Transport Corridor project. So this is the second broad area of connectivity, of maritime connectivity supplementing land connectivity. The third area of connectivity is uniquely Indian, and that is digital connectivity. The option of digital connectivity can transform India's relations with Central Asia in the 21st century. India has already begun to implement its ambitious Digital India initiative, which will empower its population to participate actively in the transformation of India. The availability of new technologies, especially ICT, that drives the creation of a digital infrastructure, will make digital connectivity the new Silk Road for our peoples and regions and complement our current efforts to overcome barriers to physical connectivity between India and Central Asia. As part of the Connect Central Asia policy, which was announced in 2012, it had been proposed, and I quote, that we would set up a Central Asian e-network with its hub in India to deliver tele-education and telemedicine connectivity linking all the 5 Central Asian states, unquote. This drew upon the already implemented visionary Pan-African e-network project, which some of you would remember was conceived of by President Dr. Abdul Kalam, and which uses a fiber optic network to provide satellite connectivity, telemedicine, and tele-education between India and the 48 countries in Africa. So that is a project which is already in operation. And the India Central Asia Digital Connectivity Project takes on from our experience of implementing the Pan-Africa e-network project. Here again, the receptivity of our initiative is greater because of the existence of this rich, intellectually empowered population in Central Asia. Now, all this is very optimistic and futuristic, and this is what I hope will be working towards. But the biggest challenge for India's relations with Central Asia is, unfortunately, posed by terrorism. And this is a priority for not only the bilateral relationship between India and Central Asia, but also India's regional interface with Central Asia and the processes such as the Heart of Asia process, which, although it focuses on Afghanistan, brings in the impact of terrorism in our region. When they emerged as independent countries in 1991, Central Asian states made their first foreign policy and security priority as countering terrorism and violent extremism. Within their societies, the process of restoring their spiritual heritage, which I've talked of earlier, was sought to be diverted by external influences, leading to a polarization in the interpretation of this Islamic heritage of Central Asia. The emergence of terrorism in Central Asian states like Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan was a manifestation of this external interference and dynamic. This had its links in neighboring Afghanistan, which at that time saw the same external influences catalyze its what is Ahmad Rashid's title of his book, Descent into Chaos, and the coming to power of the Taliban, supported actively by Pakistan. Linkages between Central Asian terrorist movements like the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, the Islamic Jihad Union, with the Taliban and subsequently the Al-Qaeda and now the ISIS has threatened the territorial integrity and social fabric of all Central Asian states. Central Asian terrorist groups have become increasingly active in the regions impacted by the Haqqani network and the Tehreek-e-Taliban in Pakistan itself. The dissolution of the Soviet Union also coincided on the Indian side with the first arrivals of foreign terrorist fighters in our state of Jammu and Kashmir. The abduction of Western tourists in Jammu and Kashmir and the beheading of one of them in 1994 presaged the brutal violence that has become the staple of terrorist activities today. The objective of terrorism is obviously to disrupt the plans for integration, for growth, for economic development. In the 1990s, India and Tajikistan worked together to support the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan, including through a medical facility set up by the Indian Army in Farkhor, where a mortally wounded Ahmad Shah Massoud was taken for treatment on 9th of September 2001, 2 days before 9/11, when he was assassinated. In 2003, two key Central Asian states, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, set up joint working groups with India to counter terrorism. However, more than 15 years later, the situation in the region has still not stabilized. Calibrated by sophisticated state sponsorship from Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, or ISI, terrorism in the region has become the only certainty in an area of uncertainty. The transitions in Central Asia and India towards socio-economic development are directly challenged by this terrorism. The regional and global implications of this challenge should not be underestimated. This was highlighted during the 6th Ministerial Conference of the Heart of Asia process, held in Amritsar on the 4th of December last year, where India and the 5 Central Asian countries participated actively in the conference, which recognized, and I quote, "Terrorism is the biggest threat to peace, stability, and cooperation in our," unquote. Terrorist disruption of the political and socio-economic fabric of the region will jeopardize not only the objectives of India's relations with Central Asia, but also other attempts to integrate the infrastructure of the region, including Xinjiang, through a revival of the Silk Road. In a world that is more interconnected and interdependent than ever before, the consequences of ignoring this reality will be felt by the people of this region and beyond. I thank you.